May I have your attention, please?
It's Markers and Monsters Drawlloween 2017.
Uh-oh, do you hear that, everybody? Listen closely. Deep in the jungle, I can hear them. Drums beating. That can only mean one thing. Yep, we're talking about voodoo today, everybody. It's going to be a fun episode. I'm going to talk about voodoo. I'm going to mispronounce a whole bunch of words, so please forgive me for that. But let's get started. As you can see, I'm drawing in here a Voodoo Zombie. Now, he's going to be in front of a spooky moon, and I wasn't sure what to put in the background there, but I eventually went with a voodoo altar with the voodoo doll on it. Now, there's a spooky, like, manor house plantation type thing back there in the background that I wanted to keep dark, but all in all, this is a fun drawing, and so far it's coming out pretty well. But hey, let's talk about voodoo a little bit, shall we? Because I feel like there's a lot of misconceptions out there about voodoo, and I just think it would be really interesting to talk about and give you guys just a quickie, broad overview. This is in no way in depth, and if I get anything wrong here, please forgive me. I tried to do some research, but in just the short amount of time we have, I don't know if I'm going to get everything just right. Now, voodoo comes from a whole bunch of different areas and religions, specifically West Africa. Now, unfortunately, the slave trade began in the 1700s. They were bringing people out of Africa to be slaves in the New World, specifically the Caribbean and New Orleans, where they were pulling the areas where they were pulling what would become voodoo out of. A lot of this was the French and Spanish doing that. So they go to French and Spanish areas, specifically Haiti, New Orleans, places like that. And once there, the African slaves, kind of modified their religions and beliefs just a little bit to kind of fit in with how things were going in their lives, unfortunately. So a lot of this is like oral tradition, folk tradition, stuff like that. Nothing really written down. So kind of fascinating. But the gist of it is, the broad overview is that there is a supreme creator of the world and the universe called Bondi. And this creator cannot be in any way reached or spoken to. You can't pray to this being because it's so far beyond anything that we know that it is unreachable. And this thing doesn't care about us here either. So it's like, don't even bother with it. But there are a whole bunch of minor spirits. They are like servants of Bondi or created by Bondi. These things are called Loa. They govern pretty much every aspect of life. The Loa each have their own personalities, their own certain likes and dislikes, the taboos, things you should not do, things you should do. They're all a little bit different. For instance, you may have heard of Baron Samedi or Samedi. Well, that Loa is the master of the dead, and you pray or give offerings to this Loa in order to allow anybody that's recently deceased into the afterlife. You don't want them to be stuck in their own bodies, rotting, or becoming a zombie or anything like that. And you also pray to Baron Samedi for healing, like cure diseases and wounds and stuff like that so that you don't die. Now, Baron Samedi is kind of a rough and tumble kind of character. He likes like loud singing. If you're going to give offerings, you want to give him things like cigars and rum, black coffee, stuff like that, chocolate bars. So kind of interesting. Another one is Dan Petro, the god of farmers. He's the guy you pray. He's the Loa you pray to if you're a farmer and you want good crops and you want to be protected and don't want to, nothing happened to you while you're working the fields. There's a lot of different Petro Loa, that's like a family name or something like that, and they have fiery personalities. They're very aggressive, and unfortunately this guy usually requires blood sacrifices. So that's in voodoo. There is a lot of animal sacrifices and stuff like that, so it's pretty interesting. Now that's a lot of broad overview. We get into specifically New Orleans voodoo, which is just a little bit different because in addition to its West African roots, it has a little bit of hoodoo mixed in. Hoodoo is another West African type of folk magic. It comes from different parts of Africa, and those slaves were brought to different parts of America. So they that hoodoo developed a little bit differently than voodoo. But again, they kind of mix up. Now, hoodoo is, like I said, like folk magic. That's where we get the idea of the voodoo doll, which I drew on the altar here. The hoodoo doll, as it is. Weirdly enough, though, the hoodoo doll has nothing to do with causing pain or injury or death to anybody. It's actually a little effigy you make up. You nail it to a tree, and it's supposed to protect areas from bad spirits and scare them off. It's actually a good thing. It's completely benign. And it's something you kind of want, to have around. The idea of a doll that you stick with pins and it hurts somebody, well, that comes from actually European witchcraft of all things. Somehow somebody got it in their mind that it should be, hey, let's make it voodoo because voodoo's spooky, and it kind of stuck in pop culture. So the voodoo doll is actually has nothing to do with voodoo, really, interestingly enough. Now, in addition to this, there's in voodoo, there are tons and tons of various rituals and things you need to do to appease the spirits. There's taboos you need to do to not make them angry, which you don't want to do. In order to do this, in order to keep all track of all this, all the songs and the rituals and the traditions and whatnot, you have various voodoo priests. Male priests are called hungans, females are mambos. And they, remember the spirits. They help perform the rituals and whatnot. And also, these are the people that might allow certain spirits to come into our physical world by possessing people. And they can do certain things that way. That's a big thing. The spirits want to oftentimes come into our physical reality to do stuff. A lot of times they cannot, and they want to. So pretty fascinating, pretty interesting. Now here's where we start to get into our zombies, our traditional zombies, because there are sorcerers or necromancers called bokans, and they may or may not be a priest. Traditionally they are not. They're usually opposed by the hungans and the mambos, but sometimes they overlap a little bit here. Now these guys use various spells and rituals, and they can contact the Loa for evil purposes and their own purposes. And one of the things they often do is create zombies. What that is you take somebody who has recently died, and you cast a spell to do a ritual, whatever you need to do, and it brings that person back to life, essentially. However, they are completely in thrall to the bokan. They have no will of their own whatsoever. So the bokan can tell them to do anything, and the zombie will carry it out, usually the most direct way possible. So you could usually the bokans have them do hard labor, like, hey, work my sugarcane field. It's back-breaking labor, but zombies are cheap to make and they don't complain, so go work the field and make me money. But you could also have a zombie go out and abduct somebody or even kill them. Pretty terrible stuff. You don't want to become a zombie because then you're basically an undead slave forever, and that's no good. There's been a lot of old school voodoo movies and voodoo zombie movies made that are definitely worth checking out. Maybe one of the first is White Zombie from 1932. That's a Bela Lugosi role. He plays a plantation owner who's also he is the zombie master, the bokan, who a plantation owner goes to in order to steal his rival's fiancée because he's in love with her. Pretty cool flick, worth checking out. You've also got stuff like King of the Zombies from 41, a great Val Lewton flick called I Walked with a Zombie from 1943. Now, I based the zombie in my drawing off of one of the zombies in that, played by Darby Jones, so pretty neat stuff. Hammer, who does all the Dracula and Frankenstein movies we all know and love, made a flick called Plague of the Zombies from 66 from 1966, which has some cool zombie stuff in it. Definitely worth checking out. Now, after Night of the Living Dead came out in 68, zombies basically became the shambling flesh eaters that we know and love, and the Voodoo Zombies kind of passed away. They went into pop culture obscurity, but occasionally some good flicks and stuff will pop up. The Serpent and the Rainbow from 1988 with the President of the United States of America during Independence Day, Bill Pullman. He's in that one, so it's a good flick. It's all about voodoo and zombies and stuff like that. It's pretty cool. There's also a couple episodes of Tales from the Crypt. Now, these go way back to the EC Horror. Before Night of the Living Dead, EC was putting out comic books and they had a lot of zombies in them, voodoo zombies, so these are adaptations and stuff. But if you know where to look, you can find some really great stuff. Well, guys, let's take a look here at the scan real quick. And I think this turned out pretty cool. I had a blast drawing it. Researching voodoo was kind of interesting. Like I said at the beginning of the episode, if I got anything wrong here or misrepresented or misspoke in any way, I do apologize. I know this is a religion. I did as much research as I could to put this together. But even still, if I got anything wrong, chalk it up to me not knowing what I'm talking about rather than any kind of maliciousness or anything. So, and feel free to correct too if you know anything more about voodoo. Throw it in there because it's a fascinating subject and worth talking about. So that's it for me, guys. I hope you've been enjoying Drawlloween. I hope you got some knowledge laid on you today, and I hope you enjoyed the drawing. Join us tomorrow. We'll be doing the live stream at 3 p.m. It'll be great, and that's it. So enjoy the rest of your Drawlloween, guys, and when you hear those drums deep in the jungle, just beware.